Hey everyone, it's Konrad Bobilak here, CEO of Investor Prime Real Estate and author of Australian Property Finance Made Simple. And today's video is about house and land estates in Melbourne. And you probably would have noticed I haven't made a video for a long time. In fact, my last video was 2017 and now it's March 2018. The reality is I've been enjoying an extended holiday for a few months and also focusing on my second book, which is simply called Australian Real Estate Investing Made Simple, which should be out this year. And I'm about to finish that book as well. And another reason I haven't made a video is because I haven't had a really good topic to talk about, to be honest with you. And I thought I was getting a lot of emails over the Christmas break and into the new year about house and land estates. And obviously Melbourne's done exceedingly well, beyond anyone's expectations last year. And a lot of younger people are priced out of the traditional property market in Melbourne, so they're turning to cheaper alternatives, which includes house and land estates. So what I wanted to do is cover house and land estates in Melbourne and talk about the good, the bad and the ugly. Do they work? Are they a good alternative for investing? Should you be buying it? And if you are going to live there, what are the things that you should be looking for and what are the things you should avoid? So this is a video that's not only relevant for investors who think about buying a $500,000 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2.5 bathroom, double lock-up garage house in a house and land estate. It's also for people who are thinking of buying it, living there, and eventually converting that property into an investment property. For those who don't know who I am, why should you listen to me? I have a bunch of things and a bunch of degrees behind me, including a mortgage broking, a real estate agent, and a diploma in financial planning. The most important thing about myself is that I'm actually I'm a property investor myself. Like you guys, I've started investing over 20 years ago and I've built up a large property portfolio. And that's really the only reason and the only qualification that I need to talk about what I'm about to talk to you about. All the other things, all these courses you can do, and they don't equate to anything really, apart from giving you a certificate at the end and a bunch of letters after your name. I'm also the author of what has just about to become a best-selling book in Australia called Australian Property Finance Made Simple, which you can buy in any bookshop or Amazon or eBay. Or you can go on my website, which is bookonfinance.com.au for $32.95. Also, as a special bonus, if you watch this video to the very end and you want to learn more about property investing and how to structure your property portfolio correctly with the notion of eventually replacing your income, I'm going to give you access to a free online home study worth $497, no strings attached, nothing to buy. You literally can just log in and watch 10 hours of content. Obviously, you have to make up your mind if you want to do that and invest your time, but I'll let you be the judge of that. So let's get into it. What I'm going to cover today is this. I'm going to cover basic stuff about house and land estates and how house and land estates are created and how they are released to the public. Because a lot of you have no idea what's happening in the background, how developers manipulate prices and how they manipulate stage release price controlled house and land estates. Not only in Victoria, this is applicable for every major capital city around Australia. I'm going to talk to you about, and specifically price controlled stage release selling. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Well, it's actually a very good thing if you want to make money short term, but also I want to show you how the market is being manipulated and how little capital growth there are in a lot of the house and land estates and how misleading the information is that you're reading about house and land estates all around Australia. I'm also going to show you historical performance of house and land estates in Melbourne specifically, because I specialise only in the Melbourne property market. And I'm going to show you how majority of so-called the best house and land estates in Melbourne have barely kept up with inflation. In fact, majority of house and land estates in Melbourne over the last decade have underperformed inflation, which means people that have bought a house for $500,000 10 years ago are actually losing equity every single year, and they're not even aware of it. They become aware of it when it's time to refinance their property and the mortgage broker says you've got no equity in your house. But how can that be? I bought it 10 years ago. Well, it's still worth I bought it for 500, it's worth 500,000. How's it possible? We come across it every day. And then I'm going to talk to you about what constitutes a good house and land estate and what constitutes a bad house and land estate. And there's one key fundamental, one golden rule that you can never break. And if you follow this rule, you can still buy house and land in Melbourne and make a good return on your equity. And if you break this rule, you're virtually guaranteed that your house and land estate will underperform inflation or just perform at 3 or 4% per year. Which means, yes, you won't lose money on it. You know, sometimes you will, sometimes you won't, but you're not going to become wealthy through it. And you virtually have no chance of building a large property portfolio using those house and land estates. Now, obviously, the reason we love house and land estates is because we're emotional creatures, and when we see those big Metricon signature homes, we get excited and we go inside them, and they've got the cinema and they've got everything phenomenally, you know, laid out, high ceilings, beautiful furniture, swimming pool at the back. It's an emotional thing, and the developers and builders know that we get emotionally enrolled in these house and land estates. And let's be honest, you know, a good one-bedroom apartment now in Melbourne will cost you $550,000 in the top 10 suburb, like Toorak, for example, or Hawthorn or Kew. A good two-bedroom apartment will cost you between $650 to $850. So when you're comparing something where you can still get a really big house, virtually triple the size of a two-bedroom apartment for $500,000, you get a massive amount of value for your dollar. And people go, shit, you know, I'm getting a massive house in a 600 square metre block for $500,000. Surely that has to outperform a two-bedroom apartment, which is only, let's say, 75 square metres, you know, internally with no land component. Well, let's have a look at that more closely, and let's have a look at some of the traps and pitfalls of investing in house and land estates. Now, let me show you where house and land estates predominantly exist in Melbourne. And this is a map of Melbourne. And Melbourne's a very interesting city because Melbourne has one of the biggest urban sprawls of any major capital city in the world. And the gap between, the distance between here and here, I mean, this is virtually a 2-hour drive now. I mean, it's a huge distance between, you know, your Berwick's and your Pakenhams, and really, what, you know, you're at the end of Point Cook and Trigonina Tarneit. Now, the interesting thing about Melbourne is, as Melbourne is growing and population growth is off the charts, I mean, you know, in 20 years' time, our population in Melbourne will exceed that of Sydney. With that growth and that expansion comes real infrastructure challenges for the government, because the reality is that people that live here, which is your South Morangs and your Roxborough Parks, and here cannot get to the city without driving for at least an hour and a half. So with the challenge of infinite urban sprawl, what you have is you have congestion and you have very limited access to the city. And the challenge with Melbourne is that all the people that live here and here all work in the city. But when it comes to the eastern suburbs, and these are the most expensive part of Melbourne and probably the best part to invest in, and this is landlocked geographically, by the way, by a river and mountains, most people that live here do not work in the city. They actually work in business parks located in the eastern suburbs and the Bayside. Only 22% of people that live in this part of Melbourne work in the city. The majority of them do not work in the city. So the problem with this part of Melbourne over here, and this is the only way you can sprawl out, by the way, you can just keep going to Adelaide, if you wanted to, past Geelong, is this is all farmland. Now, because this allows for infinite urban sprawl, the government had to make a very strategic decision some time ago whether they should allow this infinite urban sprawl to continue. And to make the decision, they actually went out and studied two cities which took an opposite view. They studied London and Los Angeles. Now, Los Angeles allowed infinite urban sprawl, and with that came ghettos and gangs. You have more gangs concentrated in Los Angeles in America than any other city in the world. Okay, and we're seeing some of that now in Melbourne, in Trigonina and Tarneit, with some of the gangs that have been doing home invasions and destroying public spaces. And you've seen it on the news. You know, it's been covered extensively. London took an opposite view. London, they said, you know what, we're not going to allow urban sprawl to continue indefinitely. We're going to cap the urban sprawl and restrict expansion of London. That's why once you leave London and you drive out, if you ever had the privilege of being in London, and you drive out, suddenly you're in the regional area where there's all, you know, acreages. So Melbourne took the same view. So Melbourne, they said, well, should we go for the gangs, or should we go for what London did? So they took the London approach, and they have now capped the urban growth boundary, which is this line here. So beyond this line here, you cannot have this land rezoned residential. This is all farmland, and it's pretty much going to stay like that for a long time. The dark patches here, and this is, by the way, Sunbury and Melton. This is kind of, past your South Morang, and this is past Trigonina, Tunneat. The dark patches here, and this is Berwick Pakenham, represent the so-called growth corridors. Now, I have no idea why they're called a growth corridor. Number one, there is no corridor, and number two, there is no growth. So don't call something a growth corridor if it's not a corridor and it has no growth. But that's what everyone's calling it. It's called the growth corridor. And it does have brand new house and land estates predominantly occurring in Melbourne. Now, the dark patches represent land that has been secured by 6 major developers, including Australand, Burbank, Simmons, Metricon. And basically they have infinite supply for the next, say, 15 to 20 years. So basically it's farmland that can be rezoned in the future into residential land, and houses can be built on that land. So what you have here is infinite supply that can be released for the next 20 years. And once that land is taken up, they have further land secured beyond the urban growth boundary, which eventually the government will allow to get rezoned residential. So the problem with these areas is not only you can't get to the city and you have the lowest income demographic in Melbourne buying in those properties, the challenge is you have infinite supply. Now, if you have infinite supply of something and you have no demand, or demand by the lowest income demographic, that's the perfect combination of creating the lowest possible capital growth. Now, this is how basic house and land estates are created. You have a bit of farmland, you have houses all around it, and eventually someone buys this from a farmer or does a joint venture with a farmer, and they chop them up into blocks, okay? And then they don't release the whole thing at once. Let's say that this represents, and this is, by the way, a hypothetical subdivision. This is not a real subdivision. I just want to give you the principle of how house and land estates are made. So once it goes through council and gets development and building approval, you can see there's dozens of lots there, and there's 20 here, 20 there, 15. So what they do is they don't release the whole thing at once. They don't say, here's 300 blocks of land that we're going to release, right? What they do is they do stage by stage release. So basically they chop up this massive estate into sections, okay? And stage 1 could be this, for example, okay? So let's call this stage 1. And here you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 blocks, okay? Now, once they sell stage 1, they release stage 2 and stage 3 and stage 4, and they keep releasing stage after stage. Now, here's the thing. This is what's called price-controlled stage releases. Let's say, and I'm just going to go over here to show you a bit of an example. Let's say in the first stage, you've got 20 blocks. Let's say 10 blocks, okay? And they're all selling for $200,000 per block. Okay, so block 1, block 2, block 3, block 4, block 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And this is stage 1. When they release stage 2, if stage 1 has sold really well, they're not going to release it at $200,000. What they're going to do is release it at $220,000. Why? Number of reasons. The most important reason, it's a sexy story now. Hey guys, did you know that stage 1 was selling for $200,000 and stage 2 selling for $220,000? We've experienced 10% capital growth in the last 6 months or 3 months. And the couple go, wow, that's amazing. We're going to become millionaires by buying here. We're going to make 10% growth on our money. No, that's not capital growth. That's an increase in price. That is not capital growth. Capital growth occurs when the property is sold in the open market by a real estate agent at an arm's length transaction. So stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 could be released at $240,000, then $260,000, then $300,000, depending what's happening. If the market slows down, they will still increase prices, but they'll shrink the blocks. If the market is strong, they'll just keep selling them and increasing the prices and have this wonderful background story of how XYZ estate is growing at 10% in the last 6 months. In fact, it's growing at 20% for the last 2 years. And mathematically and factually, it is a fact. Yes, this sold for 200, you've got the contracts. This sold for 220. There is no debate whether this was sold at 10% more than this. It's a fact. But that's not capital growth. That's price controlling, okay? And this is where investors get into trouble because they don't understand how to read stats and they don't understand how to look at this information. So by the time, this is stage 1, for example, by the time they get to stage 4, you've got all these sold out stickers and you've got these price increases. And that creates a perception, a flawed perception, that this estate is going to create capital growth in the future. Because people think, well, if it's happened for the last 3 years, that means it's going to continue indefinitely. The challenge is that it doesn't. And this is not reality, which I'll show you the evidence of these estates. And you have the last remaining block, you've got to get in quickly and get the one next to the park. And, and these are decent sized blocks, By the way, this is not a real estate. This is just a made up estate. So what has been the performance of house and land estates in Melbourne? Now, the good thing is land has gone up in Melbourne because for 2 reasons. Number 1, developers have increased the prices of blocks irrespective of market downturn. Now, the green lines represent number of sales. The red line is the price of the block. You notice here that when there's a decline, the price doesn't go down, it just goes sideways. The reason it goes sideways is because the banks will not allow the developer to discount the blocks. Because the banks own majority of this development until it's sold and the money gets released back to them. So imagine you had an estate that didn't do so well. If you have a price reduction in the block, so let's say for example here they're selling them for, they went from 230,000 to 210. Imagine what the public would find out. Don't buy an XYZ estate because last month they were selling blocks for 230. This month the same blocks are 220,000. 2 problems. Number 1, it created a bad sentiment or bad feeling about the estate. Number 2, potentially it sabotaged future settlements because those people that have to settle those properties that have borrowed 95% or 90% to get into those properties, if the block now is worth less than they paid for, they might not be able to settle. So you're going to have a developer with all these properties falling over, not being able to settle. That's why with house and land estates in Melbourne, it is manipulated by the banks and the developers for the land to go sideways or up, but never down. You'll never see a decrease in new land being released. So is it a good investment, Konrad? Well, this is the thing. You're always going to hear these stories. My cousin bought a block, in Trigonina, and then he sold it 6 months later, made 80 grand. My cousin bought a block in Pakenham that did nothing. They sold it for 2 years. They sold it for 100 grand. Yes, but how many times can they repeat that? How much money have they really made? If you buy a block of land, and this is the reality of what people don't think about, okay? Let's say you buy a block of land for 200,000 in a brand new estate. Now, you hold it for 2 years, it went up in value, okay, and you sold it for, say, $250,000. Now remember, you've got no house on that block, right? So you're paying 5% in interest every year. So you're paying 5% on 200,000, which is $10,000 for every year that you're holding the block. So you haven't made $50,000, really. You've sold it for $50,000, okay, minus the holding cost, which is $20,000, minus stamp duty, whatever, say $7,000. So you've made $13,000, and then after 12 months, you pay capital gain tax on the $13,000. You've made F all. That's what you've made on these transactions. But people, what they do is they think about, oh, it's 50 grand. I bought it for 200, sold it for 250. No, if you work out the fees, it's virtually zero. It's 20,000, it's 30,000 after tax. Even if you made 100 grand on a block of land, after stamp duty, agents' fees, commissions, government fees, capital gain tax and holding fees, work out how much you've actually made. It is not a sustainable method of creating wealth. Unless you're doing 10 blocks a month, forget about it. It's the worst way of doing anything. And the other problem is once you settle the block and you've got no income coming in, your serviceability is virtually, depending on your income, could be majorly affected. So the challenge with these stories are, they are real, but once again, people don't look at the bottom line. Now, yeah, if you buy stage 1, you sell to stage 30, and you do nothing else, yes, you're going to make $100,000, $200,000. I sold in Point Cook. I was selling houses 7 years ago for $280. Now they're worth $560. But what's the opportunity cost? The opportunity cost is that you could have bought Bentley or Yarraville or Williamstown and doubled or even tripled your money in the last 6 years on an asset that's got a much greater capital growth potential. So this is the interesting thing about these estates. They are manipulated. You can see this is residential land sales and median lot value in Melbourne. And this is from 2009, 2017. Have a look at that. It's virtually just sideways or up. But look at the green bars. They represent the actual sales. Look at those dips. In 2012, we had a slowdown in the market. But once again, they will never discount the blocks. They go sideways or up. It's the only investment that I know of that is manipulated by banks, developers and valuers to go sideways or up, irrespective of what's happening in the marketplace. And if sales slow down, they just sit on it. They just don't do anything. They cannot discount these blocks because of the reasons that I mentioned before. If you look at Melbourne, for example, and this is September 2012, an average block of land was $211,000. And then by the time we get to September 2017, it's 310. So in the last 5 years, they've gone up by 100 grand. Is it a good investment? Well, if you're going to do nothing else, and literally nothing else, it's probably the safest way to make $20,000, $30,000, in my opinion. It's land. Land will go up by itself, but land that's manipulated to go up, well, you virtually cannot lose money on it, you know? But that's if you do nothing else. To me, the opportunity cost of tying up your serviceability in an asset that's going to go up by 100 grand in 5 years, well, that's like the worst possible outcome I can imagine. Because if you buy a 2-bedroom apartment or a townhouse not for 200,000, but leverage your money and borrow 80%, you're going to make 300,000-400,000 in capital growth. So between 2012, 2017, the worst possible return in Melbourne real estate, the lowest return was on the block of land. Yes, it did go up in value. Everything went up in value. A rising tide lifts all the boats, no matter how bad and old they are. So definitely. So I currently have access to over 96 house and land estates in Melbourne, because this is the thing people are going to say, well, Konrad, you're an agent, you don't source house and land, that's why you're bagging it. You just sell townhouses in the best areas of Melbourne, which is the top 45 suburbs. Not true. I actually have access to over 96 estates. If you want to lose money and buy house and land estates in Melbourne, give me a call and I'll sell you one. It's not an issue. I can do the contracts. I have access to the best estates, okay? Now, what I want to show you is, are they all bad? Well, no. There are key things that you can actually point out that will maximize your return on these estates. And the challenges with these estates is this: you have infinite stock always coming on the market. So if you look at Point Cook, so these are the most popular estates in Melbourne. Any one month you have 500 houses on the market: Trigonina, Tunneat, Craigieburn, Mernda, Packen and Berwick. You know, and this is the problem with these estates. And this is Melbourne's property glut, howdy neighbour, and everything's for sale, because people try to get out of these estates the moment they get in there. Because everyone's renting, no one looks after their properties, plus there's nothing to do in these estates. That's the challenge. They have nothing to offer. There is no lifestyle areas in new estates. It's just suburbia. It's the most boring thing ever. This is population growth, and this is the biggest lie. There's two lies in real estate that I've come across. The biggest single lie is that population growth creates capital growth. It doesn't. It's population growth by the right demographic, meaning high income earners, combined with scarcity of stock, creates capital growth. Population growth in an area where there's infinite supply and the population of people that are on low incomes does not create capital growth. Case in point is Trigonina 2011, population 166,020. 2016, population 221,895. 33.7% population growth, the highest growth in Melbourne, second to Melton. Okay, and this is the estate. This is Trigonina. You can see it's just farmland. These are all houses, and this is 2011. This is 2017. Look at it. They've filled in all the gaps. Okay, this is 2011. This is 2017. Now, the problem is this. All these houses are identical, number one, okay? Number two, there is no geographical advantage of living in this house or that house. Because if you measure the walkability factor or the walk score of the suburb, If you walk out of this house and walk around for 10 minutes, you can't get a coffee to save your life. You can't go to a gym, you can't get a haircut. All you're going to be doing in 5 minutes walk is be in front of someone else's house. Looks identical to yours. So the problem is, there is no market for these properties. There's no market for a 3-year-old metricon home. The market is, it's a primary market. People buy off the plan in those estates and then they sell and get out of there. No one wants to buy a 3-year-old house in a brand new estate. Now, if it's 20 years old, in the 90s, that's even sadder. Have you seen those metricon homes from the 90s when they were doing burgundy and mustard feature walls? Have you seen those walls? Those feature walls that everyone's obsessed? You go into one of those properties, it's just sad. Do you know what I mean? I don't even know what they were thinking in the 90s or what glue they were sniffing, but let me tell you, those properties look ridiculous, you know? And so there's no market for a 3-year-old metricon because you can buy one here and save money on costs and get a higher first home buyer's grant. And geographically, there is no advantage, guys, between here and there. It's just across the road. There is nothing here that you can't get access to here. So the problem is no one wants these houses once they're on the market. That's why there's 500 of them every single week. And that's why there's no auctions in those suburbs, because agents couldn't get anyone to the auction, okay? You auction a suburb where there's 7 houses on the market. That's when you have people bidding, right? So number one is there's no market for them. There's infinite supply, and it's demand by the lowest income demographic in Melbourne. So you have a bunch of people with low incomes getting into the market, and how can they possibly push up the price of these properties if there's infinite supply coming back on the market? Now, I know what you're thinking, you know, oh, you just hate house and land estates. Guys, you can live there, but don't invest there. And this is the most fundamental thing about investing. Separate your emotion and look at things logically. Let me give you an example of 2012. We had a slight correction in the Melbourne property market in 2012. The market went sideways. The best suburbs in Melbourne just went sideways. House and land estates actually went down. Now, in 2012, this is the amount of houses that were being marketed for sale. Hoppers Crossing, Tarnee, Triganina, 4,048 houses. Jesus Christ. Cranbourne, north, south, east, west, Sandhurst Sky, 3,931. Doreen, Mernda, 3,718. Derrimut, Point Cook, Werribee, 2,961. Pakenham South, 2,338. Pakenham is a great community area, great for living, right? Lots of young couples with kids, it's fantastic to live in. Not a good area to get a return on your money. That's what I'm saying. So this video is not about whether these areas are livable. This is about return on cash. This is all it is. There's no emotion here, okay? So don't send me emails, oh, you know, we live in Pakenham, we're offended by your video. Pakenham is a great area, but not a good area to make money. Live in Pakenham, invest in Elwood, okay? Melton West, under 2,000. Roxburgh Park, Craigieburn, Clyde North, and Epping, 1,200. Now, the reality is this. All these estates are located in these dark patches because really there is no more land left in Melbourne to be rezoned into residential land. It's all been rezoned, into residential land. If you look at the Melbourne map showing suburbs deemed to be high risk of unemployment, the red patches becoming the highest risk, guess where they're concentrated? In the so-called growth corridors. What happened in Melbourne recently with car manufacturing? It's all shut down. So you have all these people in Werribee that have no jobs. Now, if you're working on an assembly line for Ford or Holden for 30 years, you know, putting cars together, you're not going to go into IT when you're 65, are you? You're pretty much you're done. So what's going to happen in the suburbs where predominantly everyone was working in car assembly and manufacturing related industries? They're going to lose their job and probably never get a job again. Or if they do get a job, it'll be a fraction of what they were earning when they were working in car manufacturing. That's why these patches have the highest level of unemployment, and the blue patches have the lowest risk of unemployment. These are predominantly white-collar workers working in the financial services sector or the medical sector. So as an investor, you can live here, you get a bargain, but put your money here. That's what I'm saying, okay? I'm not saying that you need to invest here and make money here. So what will happen if you get it wrong? Well, let me just give you an example. This is the national best performing suburbs in Australia. And if you could see, Melbourne has the top 14 out of the top 20 best performing suburbs in Australia, full stop. That's why Melbourne is the best property market to invest in for not only for entry level, for capital growth. I mean, really, the Australian property market is just Melbourne and Sydney, Brisbane to a smaller extent. Having said that, you can make money anyway. You can make a killing in regional areas. I know investors that just do Ballarat and Bendigo in Melbourne, and they make an absolute killing. They've got properties that are leased on Airbnb, they're all cash flow positive, and they're getting really good growth every year. If you look at the best performing properties in Australia, if you take out anything but Melbourne, you can see there, and this is over the last 10 years, all of them, you know, Balwyn, Middle Park, Balwyn, Doncaster, St Kilda West, all of them are in the eastern suburbs and the Bayside. Why? It has the highest concentration of high income earners. It has the best schools in Melbourne, the best transport, the best shopping. Did I say any more? And, you know, there's no more land being created. The worst performing areas in Melbourne are brand new house and land estates. So we have Melton, median price, 2.5% growth per year over the last 10 years. That's below inflation, by the way. The inflation is 3%. So people in Melton that are buying a 4-bedroom house for $345,000, they're getting a bargain. They have to travel for 2 hours to get to the city in peak hour traffic, and they're not aware they're eroding the equity. The equity is becoming lesser and lesser. The value of the house is actually losing money every year if you take into consideration inflation. If you look at Geelong, it's another thing, 2.9, you know, Mornington Peninsula, Williams Landing, you know, all this stuff about Williams Landing, people from Toorak are going to be moving to Williams Landing. Williams Landing's done nothing. It's done 3.2% for the last 10 years. Now, this is capital growth based on properties being sold in the open market. This is not price-controlled stage release projects by developers. By that rationale, all the blocks have done 10% per year plus because the developers control the process. So the purpose of this video, guys, is to make you understand there's a difference between capital growth, which is measured by properties being sold in the open market by agents, versus developers releasing new estates by stage, manipulating prices and selling the public the story that this estate is doing 10% per year. And that story is also backed up by people saying, my cousin bought a block of land in Berwick for $220, he sold it for $300, in 12 months he did nothing. Hundreds of those stories that I come across. Well, he's made 30 grand after tax. Great, you know, how many times can you repeat that process? Once or twice every 5 years? What? So that's not a strategy, that's just, he's made money on something, you know. You know, Melton, so, and then you've got Tunny, Trigonina, Point Cook, you know, Trigonina, Point Cook, so, you know, Tunny, they're all literally at inflation. I mean, inflation is around 3.25 now. It's come down, but it used to be 3.75. So these 20 new estates are literally growing at below inflation. So can you build a large property portfolio by investing in new house and land estates? Absolutely not. I wouldn't recommend it. Melton has the highest population growth in Melbourne, second to Wyndham, and it's got the worst capital growth. So don't believe the lie that population growth creates capital growth. It doesn't. The second biggest lie is that infrastructure spending creates capital growth. It doesn't. The best suburbs in Melbourne and Sydney have no infrastructure spending. Do you know why? Because it was spent 100 years ago. The suburb is developed. It's got all the schools, transport, everything set up. So don't believe this lie about infrastructure spending creates capital growth. So risk versus reward. It's all about opportunity costs. Always think about yourself in these terms. You have limited borrowing power, whatever your income is, whether it's 30 grand, 100 grand, 300,000. There's only so much money you can borrow, okay? There's only so much deposit that you have. And the question you have to ask yourself as an investor, is this the best use of my money? Am I holding my money in the best possible growth asset? That's what you have to always ask yourself. Forget about whether the asset is a 2-bedroom apartment, a 3-bedroom townhouse, or a 5-bedroom house and land on a big block. It's about return per year and then how to repeat the process over and over. You've got to be unbiased, guys. You cannot have any emotion creep into that equation. So what makes a good house and land estate? Your house or land must be in an infill area surrounded by prestigious, desirable suburbs, schools and infrastructure. See, there are some house or land estates that work in Melbourne, like Doncaster. Mirvac is redeveloping the golf course in Doncaster. And yes, it's expensive. Houses are $1.5 to $2 million because Doncaster's 9Ks, 7 to 9Ks from the city. But it's an infill area. It's an area that's surrounded by established suburbs, and it's just one little parcel of land that once it's rezoned and redeveloped, there is no more. Never buy a house or land package on the fringes of major capital cities. They're the worst investments you can make because you can always sell 10 metres further on and its infinite supply just keeps going and going and going. What you want to do is target new house or land estates that are infill areas. So a park or a school that's been sold, rezoned, and therefore there is no more stock once that stock is sold. Remember, the golden rule of capital growth is never buy a house or land estate where there is infinite supply and farmland behind it. This house or land is the worst located house or land estate. You have basically infinite supply in every direction. So once you buy this house here, yes, eventually when this creeps up and this is 30 kilometres of developments, that's going to be worth something. But have a look at that. You're just always competing with future stock, future estates. And there is no geographic advantage between this and this. What you want is this. This is a development in Cheltenham called Central Park. It's sold out, by the way. I did a number of houses there and townhouses. Do you see how it's in an infill area? It was a sand quarry that was eventually rezoned residential. You can see that it's Cheltenham. You got Southland Shopping Centre. You got the beach. You got Chadstone, not far from there. So you got Mentone, Balmoral as well. And see, once these 280 properties were built, that's it. There is no more land available. So the only house or land estates that I would target, knowing what I know, if you want good capital growth, now I say good capital growth, 5, 6, 7% most, target the estates where it's an infill area. It's an area that you're having a brand new property, so you get all the tax advantages and everything that comes with the new property, but you're taking advantage of an established area. Remember, in 2012 to 2017, the best performing suburbs in Melbourne were Parkville, went up by 138%. So median price went from 720 to 1.7 million. People made $1 million in Parkville in 5 years, holding an average property. $1 million. That's 200,000 per year, just holding a house. South Yarra, Huntingdale, South Melbourne, Flinders, these are all doubled in value. Box Hill, St Kilda West, Ashwood, Ashburton, all these properties have virtually doubled in value. Now, this would never happen with house and land estate. You notice here the best properties are established, not house and land estates. They've been built up years ago. Most of these suburbs are 50 to 100 years old, and there is no infrastructure investing there at all. It's zero because the infrastructure has been built up over the last 100 years or 50 years. So what factors really determine and drive property prices? Location does not determine high capital growth. Okay, if that was true, South Bank Docklands with the most expensive real estate in Melbourne, it's scarcity and high demand by the right demographics, high income earners and scarcity to create capital growth. That's the golden rule of making money in real estate. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and I hope my point came across. And I'm really passionate about this because as we approach the peak of the Melbourne property market, people get desperate. They get priced out of the best suburbs and they look for alternative ways of making money. And that's why I've made another video, which you can watch in a few weeks, which talks about can you still get into the property market in Melbourne for under $500,000? I'm going to show you some real examples of where I believe there's still value in Melbourne under $500,000. So stay tuned for that video coming up. If you are interested in learning more and if you enjoy the contents of this video, I encourage you to attend my Real Estate Fast Track Weekend. Now, I run these events about 10 times a year, once a month, once every 6 weeks. On average, depending on public holidays and sporting events. It's in our office right here in St Kilda. It's literally next door. I've got a seminar room, but we've only got 50 seats in the room, and that's why we restrict the intake to only 40 clients at any one time. There's a number of speakers at this event, including myself and obviously Stephen McClutchy, Cameron Fisher, and we change speakers from time to time. These events are free and they do book out really fast. In fact, the one in January that we had 116 people book in for that event. So we had to literally push people into from January into February and March. So if you want to attend that event, it's all you got to do is click on this website or scroll down below, click on the link and register your tickets. Tickets are complimentary. And it's an amazing 2 days. Day one, we spend all day purely on education and finance. We spend about 6 hours just talking about finance. Day two, we actually look at property. We put you on the bus, drive around Melbourne, look at different suburbs, compare growth, compare demographics, and look at different areas and which areas are going to be performing well, which ones have already performed, and which ones you should avoid as well. Also, if you are a fan of finance, if you want to learn more, get a copy of my book, which is bookonfinance.com.au, or jump onto Amazon and definitely get yourself a copy. It took me 3 years to write that book, and I'm telling you, it's the best $30 you're going to spend on knowledge when it comes to property investing, specifically in Australia right now. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is your special bonus that I'm giving you, which is a home study for free, no strings attached, nothing to buy. It's 10 hours. It's actually a recording of the Real Estate Investing Fast Track from 3 years ago. So it's actually me, but I haven't got a beard in the video, so it's still me, guys. And it's valued at $497, and it's absolutely free. It's a very simple website. You just go in, click the videos, you download the manual, and you just start watching and educating yourself. It's absolutely free. It's instant access. For instant access, all you got to do is scroll down below this video. There's a link there. Click on the link, register, and you can start watching within seconds. And that's my gift to you guys, absolutely free, no strings attached. So that's the website as well. So plus it includes a 265-page manual as well. That's it from me, guys. Thank you very much. Stay tuned for new videos that I'll be shooting in 2018 on different parts of the Melbourne property market. I hope you enjoy the content. This is Konrad Bobilak, and I'll see you on the inside.